All right, let's continue where we left off. The standard Wycliffe used to judge the Roman Church was the teachings of Scripture. He also went further in his assertion of the right of all people to examine the Bible for themselves. Wycliffe aroused the greatest hostility for his attack upon the traditional doctrine of transubstantiation. That's, as we talked about before, the belief that the bread and wine of the Lord's Supper are miraculously transformed into the literal body and blood of Christ. In the summer of 1380, he published 12 arguments against the idea that the bread and wine were transformed into the physical body and blood of Christ. He asserted that the early church held that these elements of bread and wine were efficacious symbols of Christ's body and blood. Hence, Christ is present in the elements sacramentally, not materially. The purpose of the sacrament was the presence of Christ in the soul. Wycliffe's denial of transubstantiation gave his enemies their opportunity. His support dwindled to a small minority at Oxford. First, the chancellor and a small council condemned his teachings and forbade him to lecture. Then, the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Courtenay, followed with another council that condemned 10 of Wycliffe's teachings as heretical. By 1382, the reformer was effectively silenced at Oxford. Before his defeat at the university, however, Wycliffe had turned for support to the people in cottages and towns. His mission called for the Bible in the language of the craftsmen and peasants, so he led a small number of scholars at Oxford in the translation of the Latin Bible into the English language and copied the methods of St. Francis and the friars. From Oxford, Wycliffe sent out poor priests into the byways and village greens, and sometimes even to churches to win the souls of the neglected. Wearing poor wool garments and without sandals or money, while dependent for food and shelter on the goodwill of their neighbors, Wycliffe's poor priests soon became a power in the land. Their enemies dubbed them lollards, meaning mumblers. They carried a few pages of the former's Bible and his booklets and sermons as they went through the countryside preaching the word of God. Wycliffe gained enough support that church authorities had the good sense not to move against him. His followers were hunted down, expelled from Oxford, or forced to renounce their views. But Wycliffe, though driven from the university, was left to live the rest of his life at his parish at Lutterworth, where he died in 1384. Now we turn to the passage to Bohemia. The movement Wycliffe's launch continued in England under restrictions, but found an even greater opportunity for expansion in Bohemia. The two nations were linked in 1383 by the marriage of Anne of Bohemia and King Richard II of England. So students of both countries went back and forth between Oxford and Prague. The Wycliffe revolt met greater success in Bohemia because it was joined to a strong national party led by John Huss. The Czech reformer came from peasant parents in southern Bohemia, a small town called Husinec. He studied theology at the University of Prague, earning both a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts before beginning his teaching in the Faculty of Arts and plunging into the Reform cause. His student days introduced Huss to the philosophical writings of Wycliffe, but only after his ordination and appointment as rector and preacher at Bethlehem Chapel did he come upon Wycliffe's religious writings. He adopted at once Wycliffe's view of the church as an elect company with Christ, not the Pope, as its true head. Bethlehem Chapel near the university gave Huss an unrivaled opportunity to circulate Wycliffe's teachings, including his criticisms of the abuses of power in the papacy. On the walls were paintings contrasting the behavior of the popes and Christ. The Pope rode a horse. Christ walked barefoot. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. The Pope preferred to have his feet kissed. Huss's bold, impassioned sermons in the Bohemian language fanned widespread popular support. Soon there were student riots for and against Wycliffe. The Archbishop of Prague grew restless and complained to the Pope about the spread of Wycliffe's teachings. The Pope called him to root out the heresy. So Archbishop Zbigniew excommunicated Huss. This led to a great uproar. Huss made matters worse when he openly attacked the Pope's sale of indulgences for support of his war against Naples. The move cost Huss the support of his king, Wenceslas, and when Prague fell under a papal interdict because of Huss, he was exiled to southern Bohemia. During this time, he wrote his major work in which he drew heavily from Wycliffe. Yielding to the urging of Emperor Sigismund, Huss agreed to appear at the Council of Customs. He hoped to present his views to the assembled authorities, but upon his arrival, he found himself instead a victim of the Inquisition. The rule of the Inquisition was simple. If sufficient witnesses testified to the guilt of the accused, then he had to confess and renounce the errors or be burned. The reward for confession as life imprisonment instead of being burned, or was the reward for confession was life imprisonment instead of being burned at the stake. So either way, it's either a life sentence or a death sentence. In accordance with this rule, the panel of judges appointed by the council believed the witnesses against Huss and condemned him for heresies he had never taught. Let's turn to Away with the Heretics. Huss was willing to yield himself to the teachings of the church when instructed by Scripture in what ways his teaching was wrong. But he could not agree to recant heresies he had always strongly disclaimed. For him, the truth was supreme. He was concerned that liars may claim that he had slipped back from the truth he preached. He refused to turn away from absolute truth, even to save his life. For 8 months, he lay in prison in Constance. His letters during his last month rank among the greatest in Christian literature and offer much to enrich our moral outlook. He prayed that Christ would draw him and strengthen him with a fearless heart, that he may lay down his life. Finally, July 6th, 1415 came, the day for his burning. On the way to the place of execution, he passed through a churchyard and saw a bonfire in which his books were being burned. He left and told the bystanders not to believe the lies circulated about him. On arriving at the execution ground, Huss knelt and prayed. For the last time, the marshal of the empire asked him if he would recant and save his life. Huss declared that the evidence against him was false, that he had preached to win people from their sins, and that he had taught and preached the gospel for which he would gladly die. So Huss was burned at the stake. Unfortunately, the Bohemian rebellion refused to die with Huss, however. It developed a moderate and militant wing. The moderates were called ultraquists, a term from the Latin word for both, since their primary protests called for freedom for the laity to receive communion in both the bread and the cup, or the wine, as only the bread was customarily given to the laity during this period. The militants were called Taborites, after the city in Bohemia that served as their chief stronghold. These followers of Huss struggled against the Roman Church and the German Empire until several wars reduced their number and influence. Despite the best efforts of the papacy to end this Bohemian movement, however, an independent church survived, known as the Unitas Fraterum, or the Unity of the Brotherhood, also known as the Moravian Church or Moravian Brethren, which joined later with the joined with the later Protestant Reformation and actually still exists today. There is a there was, or maybe still is, a Moravian church in Los Angeles I visited one time about 10 years ago. Um, so it's interesting that this is, in a sense, the first Protestant church, even before the official Protestant Reformation. Uh, and you see in later church history that this had a big influence also on a man named John Wesley, who was the founder of the Methodist Church. All right, if the Church of Rome was to be reformed from within, it had ample opportunities in the 14th and 15th centuries. But by the end of the 15th century, the leaders of reform by church councils were frustrated and rejected, and the revolts of Wycliffe and Huss were crushed. The value of the period lies in the demonstration it gives that reform of the papal church from within was impossible. The time of judgment had come. The unity of the brotherhood was witness to this to that fact and a promise of things to come, namely the Protestant Reformation. So this actually ends our period of early and medieval church history. Um, if you, hopefully, I will teach the second class, um, Reformation and Modern Church History, sometime in the future. So that will begin where this one leaves off with the uh, beginning of the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther and the later reformers, Zwingli and Calvin, the Anabaptists, and the English Reformation. And we see all the developments that have taken place in church history, as well as the mission movements and how the church spreads throughout the world, um, to the point that uh, the church now exists all throughout the world. Um, it's not only a Western religion, it is a world religion. And we see probably more Christians in um, places like some parts of Africa or parts of Asia, like maybe Korea, especially, than we see in maybe Europe or maybe even the United States, percentage wise. So that if you take the second class, that will bring us up from the Reformation in the 16th century up to the present day. Hopefully, I will teach that class um, not in the summer, maybe in the fall, and hope we get a chance to take that, or we continue learning anyways. But before we close, I've got one more topic I want to cover, which is what has Christianity done for the world? So as we end this class, let us take a moment to consider the contributions Christianity has made to the world. While it may be tempting to focus on the sins and failures of Christianity, things like the Crusades and the Inquisition, or uh, the sins of injustice at times that Christianity has been involved with, the contributions made by Christians and the church through history far outweigh such failures. So I will here summarize the main points of the pamphlet by Rose Publishing entitled What Christianity Has Done for the World, which presents 50 key contributions covering the entire history of the church, which we will cover in two different church history classes, this and the next one. Many of the educational and scientific advancements, artistic achievements, music, acts of compassion, and freedoms we take for granted, especially in the Western world, have come from the influence of Christians over the centuries, Christians who have followed Jesus Christ's commands to love God and love their neighbors as themselves have made powerful contributions to our world. There are six main areas of contribution considered, with several specific people and movements listed. So, number one, first area, acts of compassion. Jesus taught that those who did kind deeds for the poor and lowly, who he called the least of his brothers, ultimately did these deeds for Jesus himself. Following the example of these powerful words of Jesus, Christians throughout the centuries have reached out with love to those in need, especially the poor, weak, and needy. We see that in the very first centuries in the Roman Empire. We also see social movements in the 1900s or 1800s through the present, things like Salvation Army and various mission movements as well as charities. All right. Number two, the value of each human being. The Bible contains laws dating 1500 years before Christ, protecting the weak and innocent. For instance, it sets down rules about protecting employees, orphans, widows, and foreigners. Numerous Christians throughout history have made a difference in the area of the value of human life. Because human beings are made in God's image, they have eternal worth, and so Christians have worked to defend human life. And there are, again, numerous examples. This is very similar to the first one, examples going from the early centuries in the Roman Empire up to the present day. Defending the poor and weak and sick people, as well as defending infants. Christians have a history of opposing abortion or infanticide, or exposing infants, letting them die if they're not wanted or if they're sick. But Christians would do all they can to oppose those practices and actually protect the infants or even adopt them as their own and give them a chance at life. Freedom, social reform, and education. Because human beings are made in God's image, they are of significant value. As a result, wherever humans are treated without dignity, many times Christians have spearheaded reforms. Christians have traditionally placed great emphasis on reading the Bible and education in particular. The practical outcomes of such a perspective has resulted in numerous contributions to education throughout history, as well as, I would say, literacy itself is a big part of what Christians have promoted and worked for and accomplished through teaching as well as through translating the Bible and publishing literature. Next is science and medicine. Many significant discoveries in the field of science were made by men and women who were Christians. The accomplished German astronomer and scientists Kepler described his work as thinking God's thoughts after him. More than 60 Nobel laureates who claim a Christian worldview have been recognized in the areas of chemistry, literature, physics, physiology or medicine, and peace. Number five is the arts. Numerous works of art, music, and architecture in the medieval and Renaissance times had Christian themes or were designed for the church and dedicated to the glory of God. So we mentioned some of the architectural buildings at the time. If we could, I got into more depth about the Renaissance, we could have seen a lot of important works of art from the painters and architects, the sculptors of the Renaissance, as well as musicians. So we know things like the Statue of David and the painting of the Lord's Supper, Sistine Chapel by the artists Leonardo and Michelangelo, as well as Handel's Messiah as an important musical work, but there's other works of composers like Bach as well. Those are all very important works of art and music. All right. Next is literature and philosophy. Christianity's influence in the literature or on the literature in the West is striking. Jesus communicated important ideas that touch upon the central areas of philosophy, including epistemology, or how we know, metaphysics, or what is ultimate reality, and ethics, or right and wrong, or moral virtue. When asked about the greatest commandment, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind." That's a quote from Matthew 22:37. From its beginnings, Christianity stressed the importance of the mind. Numerous Christians throughout history have contributed to the fields of philosophy and theology, presenting the teachings of the Bible and church in a reasonable manner. So we've covered many of these in this class, and many more will be named in the next church history class, which again will continue tracing the history of the church from the 16th century period known as the Reformation up to the present day, in which we see the expansion of Christianity throughout the world. So hopefully that will give you some final uh, encouragement about the contributions of Christianity, as well as some uh, intrigue you and make you want to take the next church history class that I hope to teach. Okay, this is going to be our final primary text. It's from the Lullard Conclusions, and you can find this online at this website, as well as in one of the uh, recommended readings I gave, the Documents of the Christian Church. So I'll just scroll through it slowly so you'll have a chance to read. There's 12 of them, but I think I only picked 6 or 7 here to go through. It would have been too long otherwise. Okay, and the final attendance assignment. Um, write 1 to 2 paragraphs to answer the following question and 1 page maximum. What is one main idea you learned from today's lesson? And if you would like to do the extra credit assignment, get a few more points, if you describe in your own words the main points of the reading from the Lullard Conclusions. Uh, all right, so that will end this lecture. And now, before we close, we'll go through a study guide. Let me open that. Okay, and this presents 35 questions like the last time. The test will be a very similar format. So if you took the midterm, you should know what the final is going to be like. Multiple choice, true and false, matching, uh, and then a few short essay. So first section will come from, I've given you these questions from each of the lectures. From lecture 5, as the papacy developed and gained power, popes claimed they were the successors of the apostle blank, to whom Christ gave the keys of heaven. Number 2, the dominant city for Eastern Orthodox Christianity was blank. Number 3, the emperor blank published laws making Christianity the state church. Number 4, Pope blank negotiated first with the Huns and later with the Vandals, convincing them not to destroy Rome. Number 5, the great theme of Orthodox theology is not legal standing before God, but the blank of God and the blank of human beings. Those are 2 different words. Under number 6, under blank, the unique Byzantine blend of Roman law, Christian faith, and Greek philosophy developed, and Byzantine art expressed the distinctively Eastern form of Christianity. Number 7, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, images of Jesus and the saints, known as blank, are seen as a kind of window between the earthly and heavenly worlds. If you had joined me at the last month or a few weeks ago at the Russian Orthodox Church, you could have seen some of those actually. You always see those in Eastern Orthodox churches. All right, number 8, the Xianfu stele, an artifact written in both Chinese and Syriac and dating to 782, identifies blank as the one who first brought Christianity to China laying the groundwork for a thriving Christian presence. Number 9, blank missionaries set out from eastern Syria along the Silk Road, while blank established links with Christian communities along the Nile River. Again, that's two different words, two different terms. Uh, okay, next questions come from lecture 6. Number 10, blank was taken as a slave from England and later served as a missionary in Ireland. We celebrated his holiday a couple months ago. Hopefully you remember that. Number 11, blank was a pope who brought order to Europe following attacks on Rome and ultimately became an important political leader. Um, Number 12, during the Middle Ages, blank unified Europe into a Christian empire and was crowned as Holy Roman Emperor. Number 13, over the last 1600 years, the blank has maintained its independence as Islam dominated the region in the 7th and 8th centuries and has become central to the nation's identity. Number 14, in 610, a little known Arab merchant retreated into the mountains for solitary prayer, and he emerged as the blank, claiming to bear direct revelations from God. And just a hint, this is not a Christian, by the way, that person. Number 15, blank was the last emperor in the West who was deposed in 476. Number 16, Christianity faced a new and enormous challenge when the blank tribes swept across the Rhine and Danube frontier and left the once mighty empire of the Romans in disarray. Number 17, Gregory appointed blank the first Archbishop of Canterbury, or the leader of the church in England. Number 18, when Vikings from the Northland raided, people surrendered their lands and freedom to local lords in return for protection. This situation, known as blank, a type of government, or this situation is known as blank, a type of government in which political power was exercised locally by private individuals rather than by agents of a centralized state. Okay, next few questions come from lecture 7. Number 19. During the Crusades, Christian Europeans sought to free the Holy Land from the blank. Number 20. Peter Abelard and Thomas Aquinas were part of a movement known as blank. Number 21. Dominique and Francis developed orders that were considered blank. Number 22. In the 12th to 13th century, blank emerged as the most powerful office in Europe. 23. In 1095, after the Eastern Emperor sent out an urgent appeal for help, blank proclaimed the First Crusade to regain the Holy Land. 24. The supreme task of the medieval blank was to understand and explain the light of God's revealed truth. 25. By the 13th century, ancient Greek writings were spreading into Europe in great volume, such as key works by blank, whose teachings on the nature of the universe led students to doubt God's revelation. So that is an ancient Greek writer, by the way, who is sort of rediscovered at this time, and it proved influential to at least one of the theologians at that time. 26. Blank launched a mission to the poor and sent his followers out 2 by 2 into villages and marketplaces to teach and explain the scriptures. That actually sounds like a few different people. Let me see if I can think of a way to clarify that. Let's see. Well, 2 by 2, that's maybe the key point. And I've taken this sentence almost exactly from the lecture 7. So it's someone in lecture 7. All right. 27, the heretical blank were a great threat to the Roman Church, who revived the ancient dualist heresy, gained the protection of princes in southern France, and spread at an alarming rate. Okay, and then finally, the last series of questions comes from Lecture 8. In 1296, Blank had issued a document threatening excommunication for any lay ruler who taxed the clergy and for any churchman who paid those taxes without papal consent. Number 29, the French king Blank had the Pope taken prisoner. Number 30, the election of Pope Blank marked the start of the 72-year period in church history called the Babylonian captivity of the papacy, when popes resided in Avignon rather than Rome. Number 31, for all practical purposes, the council in Blank ended the great schism of three rival popes ruling at the same time. Number 32, at the end of the Great Schism, Blank was chosen as the new pope, yet he denied the implications of the council that elected him, since it decreed that councils were more powerful than popes. So he wanted to accept the results of the council, but not the implications that he was afraid would limit his own power as pope. Number 33, the English reformer Blank used the teachings of Scripture to judge the Roman Church, challenging the whole range of medieval beliefs and practices. Number 34, the Czech reformer Blank was burned at the stake due to false testimony, declaring he would gladly die for the gospel he had preached. Let me clarify, that's the due to false testimony against him. And then I'll just say second sentence, he declared he would gladly die for the gospel he had preached. All right. And number 35, the Blank, now known as the Moravian Church, was formed by the followers of Huss and later joined with the Protestant Reformation. So that will cover all the main questions that are on the test. If you, again, please do not fill this in and send it to me. I do not want this. I'm not going to grade it or give you credit for it. This is only to help you with the test that you'll get next week. So you can choose to do this or not. It's up to you. But if you do it, hopefully the test will be that much easier when you take it. But please do not send this to me. You do not get any credit for doing so. Just send me the normal homework for the week. Also keep in mind the paper. Send that to me for the next week or so, or by the end of the fall of the 10th week. And then, okay, the short essay for the test. Name at least one contribution Christianity has made to the world. I'll probably ask you that, and then I'll ask you additional questions that will come from the weekly extra credit assignments. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Again, send me your assignments, and if you would like a copy of any of the notes or the study guide, just please email me and ask for it. If you have any questions about the field trips, let me know. I plan to go to both of those this Saturday and then the following Thursday. And again, try to send your paper to me by the end of the following week. Maybe we'll say maybe June. Let's see, 13th, 15th. I'll accept it through the weekend, which I think is June. Let me see, June 15 or 16, whatever that Sunday is. And possibly I'll accept it a few days later, but please try to get that to me as soon as you can, ideally by the Sunday, which is the 15th or the 16th. All right. Again, if you have questions, let me know. And hope you've enjoyed the class. Thank you for taking the class, and hope you've learned some things about the history of the Christian church, and whether you've been inspired or maybe sometimes disgusted. That is the nature of nature of history. There's no perfect institution, and Christians believe the church is ultimately the body and bride of Christ, and we are called to do carry out God's mission in the world, but we haven't obviously do not have a clean track record, but hopefully you can see that the contributions still outweigh the flaws or the failures that we've had. Hopefully you've enjoyed this and learned some things, and I hope to see you again maybe in the next church history class I teach. Okay, take care. Bye.